And welcome back. Eskom has announced that in the next 12 months or so, South Africa may or may not see the required results to end the recurring power cuts and to resolve the energy crisis. Now, the entity also says that it is in a desperate race against time to ensure the completion of a 5 billion rand project to replace 6 aging steam generators at Koeberg. The efforts have been dealt a major blow when the final 20-meter-long steam generator was dropped inside a factory in China a year ago. Now, the steam generator project is a key part of a series of works to be undertaken to complete the multi-billion rand Koeberg refurbishment plan. So from last week, Eskom has been implementing load shedding, which has intensified over the weekend due to 42 units which went out of service, with some of those units breaking down over the weekend. Now, joining us is independent energy analyst Clyde Mallinson to help make sense of all of this. Clyde, good morning, and thanks so much for being with us once more here on Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina. As I was saying earlier, I wish I could be here under better circumstances.
Well, you and I both, Clyde, but hey, it is what it is. Eskom predicting load shedding for at least another 12 months. I don't suppose that comes as a surprise. We've heard this before. But, you know, what do you make of the overall assessment of what's going on within Eskom and, of course, the power situation?
Sakina, I'm afraid it's playing out exactly as one might expect it to play out. So when you in 1 week have 42 units tripping, that means that those were 42 units that were running. They weren't units that were currently having maintenance done on them. Eskom has about 100 or so coal-fired units. So when 42 trip in a week, it's like 42 out of the 100 have tripped. Now, they brought many of those ones that had tripped back into service. In fact, if they hadn't have, we would have almost been crippled. But it's a symptom of running the units that are working too hard, as it were. We're having to rely on a smaller number of units to produce our electricity. And those units that are working are then working extra hard. And as you know, it's like driving your car with a little yellow light on saying your temperature is a little bit high, you should actually stop. So when you trip and you bring it back up again, you haven't actually fixed it. You've just let it cool off, as it were, and you started again with your fingers crossed, and you might have to run at a slightly lower rate than what the unit is actually able to do if it's running perfectly.
So there was something that the COO, Jan Oberholzer, said yesterday that I was quite flabbergasted by. He spoke about how, to the point that you're making about the maintenance of these units, he basically went on to say that with some of these units, when they do break down or when they do maintenance on them, the work is actually substandard in some instances, and in other instances they simply do not have the requisite skill set. Now, why is that acceptable, Clyde? Why should we accept that sort of explanation from Eskom?
Well, first of all, it's not acceptable, and then secondly, I think that's possibly a small part of the problem. To my mind, the biggest problem has always been that, in my opinion, you can't catch up missed maintenance. If you've missed a particular critical maintenance, scheduled maintenance, there is no such thing as catching it up. That's not to say that you can't fix something, but if you've missed the maintenance, you de facto are going to have to probably be fixing parts of that equipment. And it's not just the boilers and the turbines. There's a whole feeding system, there's a cleaning out of ash system, there's a cooling system, there's multiple things that need to be maintained. And if you skip their maintenances, you probably lose the warranties from the original equipment manufacturers. And when you come to then doing that maintenance, so-called catching it up, you find that there's all sorts of things broken that shouldn't have broken had you done the maintenance at the right time. So I'm not surprised that they're having disappointing results from the maintenance catch-up program. In my book, there is no such thing as maintenance catch-up.
But if people are doing substandard work, and whether it be Eskom employees or, as he pointed out, some of the contractors that are doing this work, why is that allowed to even happen given the energy crisis that we are facing?
Well, I think because of the alternative. So I think I keep making analogies with cars. So if you miss your service when you're meant to have your brake pads replaced, by the time you get round to replacing them, you've probably damaged your discs, but you might not have discs in stock. So you look at it and you say, you know what, if we put new brake pads on, we can probably get away with this for a while we're ordering the new discs. And so that would be regarded as substandard in any motor car maintenance program. But on the other hand, the alternative would be to shut that car down or shut that unit down until you get the spare parts, the actual discs. And we can't do that because it would mean perhaps another stage of load shedding while we wait. So we're accepting that we're putting units back onto the road, so to speak, when they haven't been fully repaired, simply because we don't necessarily have the spares in stock, because the damage has gone deeper than just wearing out the wearing parts, as it were.
So I have to ask, is this, a crisis that is in some part perhaps, if not avoidable, but perhaps something that could be mitigated much better than is being done at the moment? Or is this, as some conspiracy theorists would say, deliberate so that you create a greater crisis, run everything into the ground, and then you make the argument for us to move on to other forms of energy generation?
No, I'm glad you used the word mitigate, because 3 years or almost 3 years ago, not quite, we had stage 6 load shedding in December 2019. And that was an emergency, and the president of the country flew back, I think, from a meeting with the AU, and there was a big fanfare, and we started a thing called the Risk Mitigation Program. It was really an emergency program. Well, it's almost 3 years later now, and I think one of those projects has closed financially, which means they can start putting shovels in the ground, and the others yet have to reach financial close. So one can mitigate, but we treated the emergency as if it was an opportunity to perhaps build a local manufacturing industry on the back of that emergency. So we haven't treated it as an emergency. We haven't treated it as a crisis. And we've now got ourselves painted into a corner where we're having to put, let's take a rugby analogy. We're having to put players onto the field that have got a pulled calf muscle or a shoulder injury, and we're saying, you know what, we haven't got any other players here, so let's put them on the field and see if they make it through the next 80 minutes. And I'm afraid that's the position we've got ourselves into with our coal fleet.
And obviously, it's costing the taxpayer more and more. If you look at what Eskom has submitted to NERSA by way of increases for the next financial year, it is absolutely shocking. We'll park it. We won't spoil people's morning just yet. But, midway through the financial year, it's midway now, and Eskom has already spent 7.7 billion rand on diesel to run the emergency generators. This is far in excess of the budgeted amount. So given what we are seeing at the moment, this picture isn't looking great, is it, Clyde?
No, it's not great. Now, Eskom presented to the Energy Portfolio Committee in Parliament recently, and they put out a thing that made predictions for the next 12 months. And I must say those predictions are quite bleak. But as part of those predictions, their models showed them running their open cycle gas turbines at a rate that the model could say this is how much you're going to run them. But they don't have the budget to run them at that rate. And worse than that, they don't have the ability to bring diesel to those units fast enough. So they kind of said, look, this is a theoretical rate. And in fact, if they ran them at the rate that they have shown in the analysis, they would spend 40 or 50 billion a year on diesel, not 7 billion. So they clearly don't have that. So they're kind of then saying, well, If we can't run those open cycle gas turbines as much as we say we're going to have to run them, then just notch up a couple of extra levels of load shedding. And so they're predicting, the way we're sitting at the moment, it's stage 3 for the rest of for the next 12 months. And because we can't run the diesel as much as they're planning to run them, because of the combination of lack of funding and lack of logistic ability, we could be sitting at stage 4, 5, 6, 7. Who knows? It's not looking good, and I'm afraid we've vacillated for too long now. And I don't know what else one must do. It's dangerous to shout it out from the rooftops these days, because you might trip over your solar system that you've put on your rooftop.
And then, of course, it's the whole cost issue, because, and the question I've always wondered about, Eskom paying too much, not just for coal, but if you look at the diesel situation now as well, because everything is an emergency with Eskom. So that cost as well, Clyde, do you think they are paying a fair price, or are they overpaying for what they are using?
I think they probably get diesel without all the taxes added on. I'm not sure about that, but I think diesel, Eskom can purchase diesel wholesale, as it were, without the road accident fund taxes and other taxes added. But I know for a fact.
But are they doing that, or is there a middleman involved?
Well, I think there's probably a number of middlemen. I think it's come out in various commissions. There's been any number of hairdressers and you name it that have been in between the supplying companies and Eskom. And so I don't have any evidence one way or the other there. But whatever the case is, it costs us it's close to 6 Rand a kilowatt hour to produce electricity at current diesel prices from the open cycle gas turbines, which of course are meant to run on gas but currently run on diesel. Fact is, the price of gas is so high at the moment, I think it might even cost more if you run them on gas than if you're currently running them on diesel.
So I suppose, we look at GDP and all the other inflationary factors as well. Last week, Stats SA saying that load shedding was one of the reasons that led to the contraction in GDP. And looking at the effect on the economy, last year was, in terms of electricity outages, one of the worst years. And this despite President Ramaphosa pledging new strategies. And again this year, the president addressed this matter again in July. But are the sort of interventions that the president has promised, are they yielding any positive results at the moment, and are they likely to yield positive results as far as the energy crisis is concerned?
Yeah, the good thing is that the interventions will yield fantastic results, but they'll take about 2 years before those results will start impacting meaningfully, which then just goes to show how serious it is that we've wasted the 3 years since that December 2019 stage 6 emergency. Whenever we start putting in what we need to do, which is large quantities of wind, solar and storage, there's about an 18-month to 24-month gap before those are up and running. And you can't really shorten that gap. So, yeah, if we had started doing what we should have done 3 years ago, we would still not be out of the forest or out of the woods, but we would be much better off than we are now. But at least now, a lot of the regulatory red tape has been cleared out of the way, and we need to be doing it now as if our lives and livelihoods depended on it.
Pardon my
but
skepticism.
I said that probably 3 years ago.
Exactly what I was going to say. Pardon my skepticism, but we were saying these very things 3 years ago. It's going to take 18 months and then we'll start seeing changes. And every time, there's an announcement, we're told 12 months, 18 months. When does that 18 months lapse? When are we getting there?
Well, there are a couple of projects that have closed in the private space. I think a smelter company is buying a couple of 100 megawatts here and a couple of 100 megawatts there. I would like to see the big metros take this on and start saying, we're not going to leave this all to the private sector. I'd like to see models where the citizens of all of our towns and cities, in fact, are able to invest in renewable energy technologies that would allow their cities and their towns, first of all, to be taken off of load shedding. And then by doing that for their towns and cities, they obviously can hand over, if you like, some of their load to the rest of the country and say, we've sorted ourselves out. Now you can use what we would have been using. And I don't think we should be looking purely to the mining and smelting and private sector to get us out of this mess, although most of the new facilities will be built by private sector companies, as is the case for any new electricity.
Clyde, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks so much. That's energy analyst Clyde Mallinson discussing Eskom's challenges amid a pervasive power crisis with stage 3 load shedding at the moment. And Clyde saying we're likely to stay on stage 3 for at least the foreseeable future.